Actually, it's perfect, Kaelen, that I come right after you, because this presentation is going to be a little bit the antithesis of the archive. And it's very much about the material. And it's something that I've been obsessing about, I think, working in a museum, having worked before in a context such as Palestine, where exhibitions were a rarity. What it meant to actually put up an exhibition, or the context of making art in a place where you're fighting for your life. And just the display of that. So that was always a question. And then going into the museum building projects, asking about this idea of the reverence of the object, really facing up to a dialogue with Western culture and discussing it face up with my colleagues in the US, in New York. What does it really mean? And when you build a museum in the context of the Middle East, what does that mean? And what is the sort of art and culture that we want to display in it? And this is the baggage that goes with me everywhere. And I can't ever stop that knowledge or conversation. It continues to evolve. And I hope I never treat an exhibition or my line of work ever as a thematic approach. This is a lifelong journey, a lifelong questioning. Marrakech, I was invited to come and curate it, so I took all that baggage with me, and I brought it to Marrakech, who I am, and all these questions. And I have been working and researching in the Middle East, West Asia, North Africa, South Asia, for a long, long time. And it was really an opportunity to think about the placement of these ideas and works and artists. I started with a provocative title, which is what you see here, Not New Now, La Jadid Al-An. French interpretation was meant to be diabolical. Not New Now really was, and I want you to think about it this way, because these are, this is the kind of channeled ideas. I started with not new because the focus of a lot of our ideas that we see in contemporary art practice was really focused on the new. And I felt that we were caught in a time, if you want, in a polarity of time that was either the old or the new. And now didn't figure in that equation. And it's also a very specific kind of experience of living in New York, rushing, not having a moment for myself. I was either rushing to something that I didn't know what it was, or I was going back into a past to try to retrieve something. And finding myself in Morocco, I found that I could stand still. And in the Arab world generally, but in Morocco specifically, I owned my time. I owned my now, and that was amazing for me. That revelation was absolutely fascinating. Me, now, that's what counts. And that for me was the absolute important thing to capture. The new, what does that mean? It comes also from a bigger history in modernity, in our understandings of modernity, a Western concept of modernity that we're still debating and very much kind of questioning and being very critical about, which is that which is harnessed towards the new and an accumulation of wealth and materials. What does that mean? A lot of big words. It means the bigger the buildings in a city, the better the city. It means the new iPhone. But where is the person? And where is a human being in all of this? How do you start to really put that into the equation of what matters in terms of living and the concepts of people and society and social vocabulary and political vocabulary in the making of arts? So between both of these polemics, I really wanted to think about not the accumulation of matter, freeing up this idea of accumulation of matter and not making it just reduced to form, but that it was in relationship to ideas and people. And it was in relationship to societies, what matters to politics and society. And then another kind of very important thing that comes from my research and background, Iftikhar Dadi is my teacher. A lot of these people are people I learned from. So this background of decolonization was something that I also brought with me. Of course, my experience in Palestine is something that adds to that. Decolonization here really, if you think about Palestine, you heard Ramzi Dalloul speak about it very fervently. Forget Palestine. Remove that. It was just an issue of assertion of self-independence. And what that means for a larger region that is very important to self-assert itself, especially in vocabularies of art and art history, where this place, a lot of places, Morocco, is trivialized. And the region and its influence in art has not yet, as you've been working very hard, Omar, especially through this exhibition and through the collection that Sultan is trying to build, where we're trying to build the wealth of knowledge about what is the contributions of this larger region. And it's a really big region. So I wanted to focus a show in Morocco, self-asserting Asia's legacy, Africa's legacy in art making. And I want to say, I know this is no little statement, that what we have today of contemporary art, and I do think it's very important to define modern versus contemporary, and what we have today of contemporary art, meaning not just the now, but why we see that there's in the semantics of now, in contemporary art, there's a lot that is anchored on society and politics. It's because of a legacy of decolonization and of the global south and those third world semantics. This is really very, very important for me in the language of why we develop contemporary art today, why we see that. What we see in these shows, William Kentridge, etc., that is it, that's part of that language. And it's not due to formalisms and pop art in New York City. It's due to South Africa, Cairo, and Beirut, Ramallah, etc. These are the ones that added to this global contemporary. And therefore, the contemporary is not enough in that time, in this time, kind of formal time definition. It became very important for me to anchor myself on a different terminology, and I came to the terminology, not myself, but I arrived alongside other things that I've read to the concept of living art. And living art became a more appropriate kind of terminology for me to work with throughout the Marrakech Biennale. I developed the show, and we're going to go through it just very quickly, and I hope I'm not going to take a lot of time, through an essay format that materially kind of develops. The context of Morocco and Marrakech, there is no museums, no white walls. I don't have a space necessarily where art is treated as being precious. But you have to think about a city where, this is a city where everything is made by hand. Every detail is made by hand. Every little floor tile was cut by a hand of an artisan. It blew my mind. And that, for me, was another understanding of time and creativity and production. What that meant for the creative act of every human being in a city, and what that offered me in terms of a level of quietness. Khalil Rabah, who did a longer residency in Marrakech for the Biennale, told me, Reem, it's amazing. The city's so quiet. I mean, this is the Medina with its motorbikes, but if you're in the room, you don't hear anything. And I think it's the hundreds of artisans slowly, quietly working in their little ateliers. And that, for me, was a fascinating idea about hands and making and production and creativity that starts to seep into a language of a larger city. There was something that I had to respect about this idea of the craftsmanship, high art, low art, forging relationships with those real artists that are of the city and are the makers of this language of the city and of the time equation of the city and the materiality of it, and with the artist. And I was successful in doing that through the relationships and the residencies that a lot of these artists did. So Living Matters is really one of the chapters of the first chapter that you see that unravels in Palais Badia, one of the historical sites that I chose to really reflect and put a lot of the art. A lot of it is historical. I chose a lot of art that is both mostly from Asia and Africa. And I start with a prologue by Mantia Diawara. And this is my way of also going into the history, provocatively and critically, questioning Pan-African ideas, Pan-Asian ideas. Where did we go wrong? Where did that decolonization and ideas really, some of the ideas where Kaelen is reflecting on these, within the archives, but that never manifested. Maybe the art is something we need to bring back, the materiality is something we need to bring back to really kind of question that. A prologue through Mantia Diawara's beautiful film, an imaginary discussion between Wole Soyinka and Leopold Senghor about what it meant, what was lacking in the decolonization process and the relationship in that, because Senghor became the first intellectual freely elected president of Senegal. And he came up with this, he really was about ideas such as negritude. Where was the essentialism in that rhetoric? Where could have we gone wrong with these ideas? How do we refrain from essentialisms? When people question, for example, something as being Western, well, isn't the Western also Eastern because it borrows from us? And aren't we also someone else? When Bushra Khalili or Qadir Atiyah or Zainab Sadira are artists that are from various nationalities, they're not just their origin, and it's very scary to essentialize them. They are both multiple kind of, they're from many places. Eric Van Hove's piece that he did, this was placed in the middle as kind of the start, and this is an engine of a D92, which is, it's the engine of a caterpillar made by African and Indonesian craftsmen together. This is the same model of a caterpillar that killed Rachel Corrie, the American activist in Gaza. So this is a hand materially done, if you want, memorial to, and in a sense, it's like a de-violencing mechanism to really kind of bring it back to the core ideas of the people who made it. I made a big selection of, through my collaboration with several other curators, two here, Salma Lahlu and Fatma Zahra Al-Khrisa, they co-curated with myself a selection of Moroccan artists. This is the Casablanca School. We saw in one of the presentations of Dr. Ramzi Dalloul, Melehi's work, this is Farid Belkahia. And this is a very important school in the 50s and 60s, coming back from artists who studied in Paris and New York, Melehi, whose work you see here, and this, The Flame, for example, is actually done, he was friends with Rosenquist. James Rosenquist, the famous pop artist in the US who goes for $20 million. Melehi was his contemporary. They used to have dinner together. But he's now in the annals of forgotten history, and his works are worth $40,000. Everybody should go buy them, by the way. And this, for example, this iconic cutout piece is, I would say, a unique example of political pop art of its time in its absolute abstract form. And this is representing the flame, or the cross-Atlantic. And it was meant to be as a symbol or emblem for the Intifada, or the Palestinian kind of call of resistance at the time in the 60s. This is way ahead of the Intifada of the 80s. Mohammed Shab'a was also part of that semantic of the Casablanca School. These are ideas of artists that came together, said, you know what, it's not enough to do art for the art's sake. They have to have, in their form, really social and political ways of narrating. They created artworks that were also, they displayed out in Jami' al-Ifna, this very beautiful public square in Marrakech. They put it out there in the public. They didn't care about it being, weathered, shitted on by pigeons. And actually, I displayed them purposefully in Palais al-Badi', in these open courtyard rooms, in the way they were meant to be shown. Humidity. We did have pigeons shit on them, I will admit. And we had to treat that, but it's okay. And it was out there displayed in that way with archival material to anchor it, to show that history. And it was fascinating, the response of people, even Moroccans, who didn't know that legacy, which is quite shameful, I would say. Again, a glorious, nearly 3-meter piece by Shab'a. And these are owned by collections also in Morocco. Then there was Khalil Leghrib. I mean, this guy is like magnificent. Khalil is an artist that deals absolutely with the idea of ephemerality. Where does the unique position of an artist or a human being stand from objects and things? And he's obsessed with death. It's his thing. Like, he's obsessed with the idea of the dying, the decaying. All his objects are objects that are made of natural materials that decay. Bread, mud, straw, hay. A little anecdote. We had this piece in a little display. These are like tiny objects, and they decay throughout the exhibition as well. He doesn't sell his work. He lived as a Sufi kind of person, teacher, teaching history and geography in a school to make a living. But he does his art every single day. Fabulous theoretician and philosopher. And this work, for example, someone in the audience from the first week snatched the little balls. I had to call Khalil. Si Khalil, I have to tell you the news. Unfortunately, someone took the balls of paper that he was like, really? That's amazing. It means someone loved it so much that he contributed to the death of the work. And you know, thievery is a form of love and decay. I was like, I love you. Can there be more of you? My necklace. Okay. Here we go. Sorry. And then, for me, it was very important to go across the Atlantic and really share with the legacy of various artists, African-American artists in particular. I'm not unaware of what's happening in America with the Black Lives Matter movement, with everything that is happening. It's very important to evoke the conversations of solidarity. I brought back the history of that art making that is also forgotten. And this is Al Loving, beautiful abstract tapestries. And it was the most amazing thing. Unfortunately, this is not the image to show it, but you'll see it in another thing. But he creates these kind of torn, if you want, tapestries from things that he sewed. He only made 12 at the time. He realized it was taking him a lot of time, so he made more collaged paperwork. But this is at the same time that an artist like Noah Purifoy, that I really tried hard to bring to the Biennale. You know, there's a lot of like the failed artists that you couldn't bring. Noah Purifoy wrote a manifesto about how artists in the 60s during the liberation movement of Black artists, African-American artists, that they should actually work to build their art from the archives, from the recycled matters of the burnt houses that were, you know, a lot of African-Americans were subject to lynches and in many ways, like house demolitions, and people's houses were being burned down. So he said, we should rise from that, use the recycled matter and recycle it and make this kind of art. So there became an aesthetic form about recycling that was very important for me here, to bring it back. And this is also, in a way, to treat this idea of ecology that is also very pertinent to our time. It's enough about the accumulation of new matter. It's very important to salvage what we have and make vocabulary that is meaningful. Djibril Diop Mambete, a famous filmmaker from Senegal, also a part of a group that is Laboratoire Agita Art, about this form of agitating art, made a selection of award-winning films. We displayed a group of them there. David Hammonds, I didn't show any work. This is just, he just he just came to the Biennale. That was his participation. And he loved it, so it was worth it. He gave me a pin. I can show it to all of you later. And it's a little umbrella pin. And he said it's gonna rain in the last week, and it did. So this is Sam Gilliam, another artist who, you can see these beautiful hung abstract paintings. This is really done in this moment of thinking about form and abstraction. For me, what was most beautiful, I'm sorry about the lights like right in front of it, but the ceilings, these hand-carved walls and floors. It just, even the person who installed the work, it was his last mission for the artist, his assistant who came to install the work, said it was the most fitting kind of end for him because he felt like it was placed in the right place, that it echoed and mimicked the artistry of the place. Talal Afifi is an artist who lives in Khartoum and built a collective, the Sudan Film Factory, works with several young filmmakers and people and teaches them about this idea of filmmaking. This was also very important for me, digitization, filmmaking, new media, how that is also a kind of another call from the material. Melvin Edwards' famous kind of Lynch series with his masks. Oscar Murillo, a younger artist from Colombia who came and filled the room with these canvases that people are allowed to touch and step on and really feel, and that was already very liberatory. And he masks through them this idea of, you see in the middle there corn pieces that are molded. And you know that in the history of museum, like mold is the absolute arch enemy of the painting. And what does that mean for people who come from a legacy of slavery and corn plucking? I thought that was a very interesting provocation. Dineo Seshe Bopape, South African artist who did a fantastic installation in the place. And it was about a liberation song from South Africa. And then the fabulous project by Omar Barrada, Ahmed Bouanani, reflecting on the legacy of Ahmed Bouanani, the filmmaker and critic, his archives, also inviting artists to produce work, showing the films of Ahmed Bouanani. And we also created a live kind of library of the Bouanani and archiving those books at the same time. Tuda Bouanani, his daughter, was showing the film that she had done on her father. Ali Safi had shown a film about Bouanani. Sara Wahdu was one of the artists that reflected on the Bouanani and did a fantastic kind of talismanic jewelry design about the works derived from the very designs of Bouanani on jewelry that he had archived. Ito Barada did her famous now banner series reflecting on parables that Bouanani had also translated of the time. Mohsen Harraqi did a great installation, a light installation. And then we went to the last of the chapter was Bushra Khalili, and her work for me, this is a work that she'd done on migrant labor in New York City and the questioning of their kind of slave-like conditions to this day, because I didn't want it to be, I wanted to remind the audiences that this is a momentous kind of time for us, that this dialogue and language can be questioned everywhere in the world. It's called Living Labor. And the Autolith group as well, their famous kind of project that they did about the Ghanaian decolonization of Ghana and its questioning. Isak Berbich with a photographic series, one of the only photographic works that I put in that show. And last in that was Tariq Atwi's performance piece that he did in Marrakech, in the Palais Badia, his courtyard. Adrian Villaroja produced a film in the very end that was really his visit to a lot of sites of craftsmen and artisans, and he really focused on that materiality in the making process. And it was very, I want to say, biblical in the way he showed the film. Second site, we'll go quicker because that was the very big chapter. This is Living Ruins. It's Palais Badia. So this is the second site of the Biennale, as you can tell, quite magnificent already. How do artists respond to such a public space? Here, craftsmanship, ideas of survival, both of like, is it the matter that survives or is it the man that survives? I think this polemic was very important. Ella Natsui did a famous, kind of now very famous commission for Marrakech specifically, one of these kind of large tapestries made of his the cans. And Rashid Quraishi, I found out about these series of jars that he developed in a sawira, the nearby, and we put it in the water because we didn't want anyone to break it, so it worked. Haig Ayvazian did a 4-piece essay of multiple works that have many references, looking at this legacy of museums, museology, even down to like the history of colonization, the building of the archives from the Napoleonic kind of references. I invited Radwan Mriziga, who's a younger artist from Morocco, a choreographer, to create a choreographic dance performance in the Palais Badir. Radhika Kimji, an artist based in London, Omani, Indian artist, and she placed her fabulous parachutes in the Palais and also in a different site, which is the Kutubiyya. Fatiha Zammouri, a hanging rock. This is made out of polyethylene, but this idea of the sized and weighted really became, and this became so emblematic, people kind of loved it as well. She's a Marrakech-based artist. Saba Annab did one of the beautiful pieces about the Strait of Gibraltar in 3-dimensional form. What does it mean, the strait that kind of connects, and if it connects, there's an ecology of people that also dies, and that's kind of fascinating. Jumana Manna did her iconic series, and Jumana's figured here in the display of Barjeel. She did her a series of works from plaster with local craftsmen, and of the ideas of ruins and the shells of places and buildings. Megumi Matsubara did a performance piece in the cellars of the Badia. And sorry, these tiny works were also put in displays, and they're actually little objects made by blind children to what they interpreted these objects to be. And it's meant to be objects for people who see, because you're supposed to touch it to understand what it is. You're not supposed to only see it, because that means nothing. I'm still at 90. Okay, and Ahmed Mater, I'm just gonna have to go very quickly. Right and Right is another site. In the third site I had, and this was dealing really with ideas of gender. What is right? What do we consider things as right in the nation building process, in ideas of nationalisms, the making of role formations. Muhammad Murabit did these iconic kind of breast-like plaster paintings, and I thought, they're very provocative, and they're meant to question, this is meant to be the 700, which is the 7 saints of Marrakech, but he alludes to them as being women. Muna Hatoum was beautifully displayed with her pieces, again, questioning home, references to pieces about migration and all of that. Khalil Rabah, it was a kind of a mini retrospective of his works from the 90s, questioning gender, placement, national being as a Palestinian. Dana Awartani made these geometric pieces in her iconic style with local craftsmen. The last chapter is Sites and Sites of Knowledge. I played with the words because in the end of the day, I was also referencing 2 artists that were very important for me here in the making of this exhibition, which is Decolonizing Architecture, who did a residency, Sandy Hilal Alessandro Petti. Their work is really about decolonization at FAR. What does that mean? And they really emphasize this idea of the making, that knowledge and knowledge making is the way forward in our production and sites of kind of resistance. They did a work where they had accumulated a lot of writings by refugees in Palestine, and they wanted to create and bind the book and have a writer calligrapher in Marrakech write the book. And he did, and this is meant to be the book of return. And it's meant to be a symbolic book that is forged as a maker of knowledge in the Kutubiyya Mosque's Plaza, because that was the place where it's called Kutubiyya because, and it's one of the oldest mosques because it was a place where they sold books. And it's meant to be a symbolic act across the across the Mediterranean because of also the sites of what we're seeing now of refugee and immigration. Rayyan Tabet also displayed a big selection of work. Khalid Malas, the work that Kaelen kindly talked about. And this is the book by Sandy Hilal and Alessandro Petti. Kwasa Kwasa by Superflex, that was about the migration of people in Mayotte, in the Comoros Islands. Fabulous piece. And the last is Qadr Atiyah, and I end here just by saying it is very important to think about his terminology that he comes with the idea of cultural reappropriation. Because cultural reappropriation means that culture does not stand on a hierarchical plane. And it is about a cyclical and continuous way of feeding one another. The colonized took from the colonizer learns from the colonized. And that is the nature and maker of culture. I'll end here. Thank you.